When discussing live experiences, we must include live theater. So today, I want to introduce Jim Joseph. His theater career spans over 3 decades, on and off Broadway. Jim is currently the director of operations for the Second Stage Theater Company, where he oversees the operations of the Helen Hayes Theater and the Tony Kaiser Theater. The company recently won the Tony Award for the Best Play Revival, Take Me Out. In addition to directing and producing, Jim is a speaker and advocate for diversity and inclusion in the Broadway community. Welcome, Jim.
Thanks a lot, Mark.
So good to have you. We've talked about doing this for a while, so I'm glad you can jump in and do this because I know you got some great stories, which we've talked about for many years.
Absolutely, and I really appreciate the opportunity. And congratulations on this as well.
It's fun. It's fun.
Yeah,
it's fun.
Exactly.
Talk to friends, chat with friends and see what everybody's doing. So let's get into it. So tell me how you got started. How'd you get into it? You've been doing this for a while. I don't mean to date you in the intro, but I know you've been doing, I followed your career. We kind of, when you started theater, so you've been doing this a long time. I don't want to call you a veteran, but you're right in there. So tell me how you got started.
I'm definitely there. Well, I always like to tell the origin story. It goes back to high school, just like anybody who works on and off stage. It all starts in high school as an actor, as a performer. I had the opportunity to perform in my first musical my sophomore year, and it was Westside Story. And I always say that if it wasn't Westside Story, I wouldn't have had the guts to audition. It was at the point my favorite movie, my favorite play. It was my parents' first date was to see the movie in the movie theaters. It was directed by my English teacher, and we got excused from football practice to audition. So It was sort of like a perfect storm of opportunity. Again, if I didn't do it then, I never would have. Had a great opportunity. A lot of my teammates got cast in the show as well. I was one of the few people who continued to play football and do theater throughout high school. I was able to juggle both of them. I always joke that I was Glee before Glee, but no one ever threw a Slurpee at me though.
No. Well, you were still college. Cool if you were playing football. Well, you can straddle both.
Right. In the moment, didn't think I was, but I definitely ran with the cool kids. But I was they took pity on me back then. But get to college and theater was in my past. Again, I was playing football and I was focused on a career in radio. That was my goal when I went to college, study radio broadcasting, wanted to do all the things. Fell back into doing theater, was asked to help out with the musical that year, ended up being on stage without even auditioning. The theater program at my alma mater, Marist College, wasn't a theater program. It was a student-run club. Mm-hmm. And because of that, it made it easier for us to sort of just jump in and do it. Well, we had very little faculty and administrative oversight. But over the course of 4 years of college, I worked on 14 different productions. Wow. And it ranged the gamut from just being in a show, then to stage managing, directing, producing. And it was just an amazing, amazing opportunity. And right before I graduated, I realized that I spent more time in the theater than I did in radio. Mm-hmm. Even though at that time I had sort of moved through all of the benchmarks I'd set for myself in college. I was on the college radio station. I got the internship I wanted. Through that internship, I actually got an on-air job at a top 40 radio station not too far from my school. So I was doing overnights from midnight to 6 a.m. every Saturday night during my senior year of college. But I realized that the passion that I had for theater didn't exist in radio. And a lot of it was because of the human interaction.
Sure, people.
Working in theater, when you're performing, whether on stage or off stage, there's an audience there and you get the immediate feedback of your work. You know immediately what's going on.
Right.
I was at the station 2:00 in the morning. I was the only person in the studio. I didn't have an engineer. Right. In a deserted part of town, and the phone stops ringing. So I might as well be playing music to myself in my bedroom. There was nothing there. So I realized that this wasn't for me, even though I spent the past 4 years saying, this is my life. This is what I'm going to do, which leads to the first goal is that it's important to have a plan, but it's also more important to be able to change your plan.
Completely agree. I mean, Same thing. I think when we were both started in theater, and I was set on a plan, and then it got diverted. I was devastated at the time, but then came
Right,
back, and you got to be flexible and understand that. I think that's something to understand early on. You may know what you want,
right,
but it may be a little different than what you think it might be.
right. And that's okay because as humans, we are programmed to adapt and to change and to grow. Um, I went, I did some research without the internet. I have to always preface that without an internet and without an alumni network at my disposal. And I was lucky enough to land an internship with a producer, Richard Frankel, who's an off-Broadway producer and general manager. And for the next 10 months, I just learned. I learned that my experience was more than I thought it was in college, but I was intimidated because I didn't have the degree and I didn't know maybe all of the terms that were used and the exact process. But at the end of the day, we're still telling stories and we're creating art.
Right.
So it was almost like learning a new language. I
Mhm.
knew what I was doing, but I didn't know how to say it the way everybody else was saying it.
Right.
And then through that opportunity, I was hired actually to be a house manager for a show that they were working on. And that was more so out of I needed more money working
Hmm.
as an intern. So for the grand total of $300 a week, I was working Tuesday through Friday in the office during the day and then house managing 8 shows a week off Broadway. And I always say everybody in this business works in front of house, dealing with the audience at some point or another. And
You
people
have
learn
to.
either that they love it and they have a particular skill set, or they hate people and they never want to do it again. It's just how it is. No one ever decides as a career path they want to be a house manager. They want to work in the front of house in that sort of situation. But you're exposed to it and either you love it or you don't. And I learned pretty quickly I had the skill set to be successful
Right. You do.
at that, and I enjoyed it.
Hmm.
So that became my entry point into this industry. Over the next couple of years, I bounced around. I did some other things. I worked in educational theater. I did some marketing. I did some fundraising. I worked out of college, but it circled back 4 years later when I became the first house manager at the New Victory Theater, which is
Hmm.
on 42nd Street. It was the first historic theater to reopen on what was then called the new 42nd Street.
Yeah, it
And it,
was the renovation. You were part of that whole renovation of
I,
42nd Street when it was
yeah,
not so nice.
yeah, it was unbelievable. When I went for my interview, every storefront on 42nd Street between Broadway and 8th Avenue was shuttered.
Yeah.
It had already been condemned and shut down, and for a while we were the only business operating. I had a front row seat for the entire renaissance
Right.
of
You
that
did.
block, which was unbelievable. I was there for 12 and a half years, and it definitely shaped me for the rest of my career moving forward.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I was Disney part of that, or were they were just
You
about to
know,
come in?
What Disney came in a little bit after, and what's amazing is, we've always heard the phrase over the years, the Disneyfication
Right.
of Times Square, and their role wasn't nearly as large as uh, people want to believe it was.
Hmm.
They moved in, they took control of the New Amsterdam Theater, which
Hmm.
they renovated, brought it back to its former glory, where they've been running Broadway shows there. But that's really it,
Hmm.
but it was just the fact that they were associated with it kind of
Right. Right.
legitimized everything
Right.
else. And it was important when they signed on because up until that point, no one else was willing to make that leap of faith on the 42nd Street. So once they did, then other businesses realized,
Right.
well, if it's good enough for Disney, it's good enough for us.
Right, right. If they're investing over there, they must have done the research and they see something happening. I mean, it really is a different place today than it was back in the day. I mean, I used to work down the block. When I started theater too, I remember doing my first show off
Yeah.
Broadway when I first moved to New York, and somebody had stole my clothes out the back. On theater I had put my
That,
that's all I had. Somebody had
right.
stolen them right out of the back. I mean, it was a different time there.
Yeah. Oh no, absolutely. I mean, I remember when I was an intern, when I was working on 47th Street, and one day I decided I'm going to go to 42nd Street on my lunch break. Because we just didn't do. I remember turning the corner and just stopping in my tracks. I'm like, what have I walked into? And I grabbed the hot dog from the corner and just ran back. And I legitimately did not step foot on that block again for 5 years until I started working there.
I it's
Yeah.
very different. I'll be honest though. try to still avoid 42nd Street unless I'm going to see a show or something. It's a
Right. No,
lot going
absolutely.
on.
Yeah, it's definitely hit because of the pandemic, it's in a transformation phase again.
Yeah.
So as always, I'm confident that it will rise again.
No, and I'm not saying it's bad. It's just for me as a New Yorker,
Of course. Of course.
It's very touristy.
Oh no, absolutely. What I always love when people ask me for like restaurant recommendations, I always say, if you're a tourist, you eat in Times Square. If you're in New York or going to see a show, you go to Ninth Avenue.
Right, exactly. Right, Ninth Avenue. You find the place, then you come in for the show, and yeah,
right.
But the amount of shows that are out there right now are pretty incredible. What's going on?
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, to put it in perspective, when we reopened the New Victory at that time, New Victory, it's a large off-Broadway space, but there were 35 theaters on Broadway that were operational. Now there are 41.
Oh, I didn't even know that. That includes that's just Broadway or off-Broadway?
Just Broadway, just Broadway. There are 41 now. So there were a number of theaters that had been shuttered, condemned, out of circulation, out of operation, that because of the neighborhood, turning around and becoming safer in the eyes of the public, there was more opportunities to open these theaters and create more product.
So just to be clear, and this is somebody explained this to me, Broadway theaters don't need to be on Broadway. A Broadway theater has to do with seating capacity, right?
Exactly. There are two parameters to be a Broadway theater. One, it has to be 500 seats or more. And then the second, it actually has to be in what they call the Broadway box, which is 41st Street to 57th Street between 6th and 8th Ave. Oh. Now, there are two theaters that are just outside of that. You've got Lincoln Center for one, Lincoln Center Theater, and the Hirschfeld Theater where Moulin Rouge is, which is just slightly west of 8th Avenue.
Right. And then what's considered off-Broadway? It's just anything below 500?
Exactly. Yep. And really, it's those terms really come into play when you're dealing with labor unions. Mostly Actors Equity, but some of the other offstage theatrical unions as well, because there's a pay scale. Because unlike film, in theater, you can only make so much money. You have X number of seats. So you're limited to that number of seats, that number of tickets that you can sell. Right. So if you have a hit, the only way to make more money and capitalize off of your success is to raise ticket prices. Whereas in a movie, you just show it in more movie theaters and more screens. So based on that, the limited potential of your income, then it kind of it scales out how much you have to pay your people.
And that's all people. That's from actors to
absolutely
to crew.
Right. Everything is scaled. At my current job, I'm at the Helen Hayes Theater, as our Broadway home, which Second Stage purchased and renovated in 2018. We're the smallest theater on Broadway. We have 591 seats. So compared to Harry Potter, which has 1,700 seats,
it's not many.
The disparity in income. I mean, if we, on a good week for us, we can gross $350,000, and we're doing cartwheels. Harry Potter, they gross $350,000. They're closing the next day.
Right.
Interesting. Yeah. So it's all economy of scale.
Right. No, it clearly is a whole business, and then sometimes you'll have an off-Broadway grow. It's so successful they can grow to a Broadway.
Absolutely. And a lot of it, the shows that are done off-Broadway are done sometimes with the intention of that being sort of the incubator to get it to a Broadway platform.
Gotcha.
I mean, it's starting with one of the most famous ones was A Chorus Line, which when it finished, it was the longest running show on Broadway. That started off-Broadway at the Public Theater. And then over the years, many shows have followed that template up to and including Hamilton.
Yeah, that little show.
Exactly. But now producers are more savvy about it, where they'll have that as the long-term goal, from the get-go.
To start out small, test it.
Right. Well, and it's not even small as much as with less eyes on them, because Broadway is the name Broadway is associated with a certain level of quality. It's inherently has more attention, more eyes, more media on you, so more scrutiny. Opening a show brand new on Broadway is a recipe for disaster because
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah. So there is a developmental process, an incubator process.
Sure.
I'm to create a new musical. I mean, it takes about 7 years
Right.
from concept to stage.
Wow. Right. And that
Yeah.
makes sense. They would even do it at a when I say opera, other states, you hear these shows out in Michigan or something.
Absolutely.
Nothing wrong with Michigan, but
no. Michigan is a hotbed of theater, actually. There are a lot of places. Growing up in New York, there's this bias that we are the center of the world, we're the center of the universe, and that on the other side of the George Washington Bridge, there's no culture. I
said that I didn't.
that was the impression that I had up until I really started working in this industry, and I was exposed to the national theater scene.
Mm-hmm.
Had the opportunity to work for a brief period of time with an organization called Theater Communications Group, and they are the national organization of the American theater, and they help to create a cohesive network of nonprofit regional theaters,
right?
Which is different than what we think of as the commercial Broadway theater.
Right.
Nonprofit theater, which is where I've had the fortune of working in for most of my career, is really where artists have an opportunity to experiment and to take chances and take risks, as opposed to doing the safe commercial. Think of it as the artsy film, the Angelica movie house, as opposed to the Jurassic Parks and the Marvel movies.
Well,
it's a great comparison.
It's expensive to put on a show, a Broadway show, so you have to willing, and it's real people, real time. You can't edit. You can't edit it. You can't do. So it's that experimental period that you can kind of edit it as you go, and the only way to do it is over time. Not only that, what is the audience response per and per show? It might change too.
So, yeah. Part of the creative process with anytime you stage a show, whether you're doing it for the first time or you're reviving it, is what's called the preview process.
Right.
So once you start performances, usually the first 2 to 3 weeks that a show is on sale, that is what's considered a preview.
Mm-hmm.
And what's happening is the show is not frozen yet. So during the day, the cast is actually rehearsing.
Mm-hmm.
And they're rehearsing, they're tweaking things. They'll do the show that night. And there's a meeting afterwards with all of the creative heads, the lighting designer, the director, set designer, and they'll take notes, and they're still tweaking and changing things. And the next morning, the crew will come in at 8 a.m. and will implement a lot of those technical changes.
Really?
If it's a new show, there might be script changes. There might be new pages. The cast will see those new pages at 12:30 in the afternoon, rehearse them, and go on stage that evening and do it again.
Wow.
And that'll take place over 2 to 3 weeks. And once the show is locked in or frozen, then the press is invited.
Right.
And that's when they're invited in to come and to review the show leading to the opening night.
So they can't make comments prior to that.
Exactly. Now, there's nothing stopping a critic from coming and buying a ticket to a preview, but it really breaks its sort of professional code of conduct to do something like that. And they probably wouldn't be invited to any press events ever again. Yes, right.
Now but you can't stop social media, though.
No, not at all. The latest trend now is, a couple of shows have just started their preview performances, and you've got these TikTokers who are doing reviews of like the second performance of a show. And Sweeney Todd just started performances, Parade just started performances. And you can go to TikTok and you'll see people critiquing these works in progress right now. And there's a growing debate right now that we don't know if that's good or bad, because any publicity is supposed to be good publicity, but is it really?
Yeah, but I think if they're doing it in such a way that it is in preview, and I think people understand it's a work in progress, maybe it is.
Right.
I mean, if they're killing it right from the get-go, then that's a problem.
Yeah.
So
also,
go ahead.
Well, theater people are catty anyway, so we love a good disaster at the same time.
I'm not gonna touch that. So as a house manager, or as you are currently the director of operations, tell me. We were talking prior, you got a show closing, you got a show opening, in rehearsals. Tell me a day in the life or a week in the life of what
Okay.
you do.
Okay. Well, let me set up the overarching theme. My job is to give the artists all the tools that they need to create their art. Um, my job is to give my colleagues the tools that they need to do their job. You know, that's how I sort of phrase it. I'm responsible for everything from the front door to the back wall of the building.
Gotcha.
And that includes theater maintenance, cleaning, um, capital projects improvements, front of house, security, COVID, and
Oh,
IT.
ooh,
Yeah. So yeah, COVID's still a thing, but that's a whole other conversation. But yeah, so my job is to make sure that everything is there for people to do what they need to do.
mhm, mhm.
Um, and my job is to make sure that that when we start performances, that the audience is given the best chance to enjoy the show.
Gotcha.
As an audience member, you're coming to see a show, and if you have a negative experience picking up your tickets, and you're
Oh,
shown to the wrong seat, and maybe you don't get a playbill, you go to the bathroom and the bathroom
the
is
lines.
dirty.
Why the lines are too
Right,
long.
exactly, like all those things. And so by the time the show starts, you're in a negative headspace, and that's
Gotcha.
going to adversely affect how you experience the art.
Hmm.
My job is to make sure that when the curtain goes up, you are ready to receive that art. Because art is subjective. There
Mhm.
is no guarantee you're going to like the show you see. But my
Interesting.
job is to make sure that you judge it on what you've seen, not what you've experienced before getting to your seat.
Interesting.
So
And that goes the other way towards the actors and the technicians and the designers and stuff. Like, how do you?
absolutely.
I'm sure you have to deal with their needs.
Oh, absolutely. I always joke that the first day of technical rehearsals is the day that the actors actually move into the theater. They're usually rehearsing at a studio someplace
Hmm.
while we're loading in the sets and the lights and all that
Right.
stuff. And that first day, I liken it to freshman moving day into the dorms
Okay,
because there
that's a
is
good
this,
one. Yeah.
yeah, there's this nervous excitement and energy, but then nobody knows where anything is, but they're just excited to be there. And my office is literally around the corner from the dressing rooms.
Okay.
So I'm like the RA. So every 2 minutes, someone's walking. Hey, what's the Wi-Fi password? What's this? Where do I get this? How's the water? You know, what do I do this? Just everything you can think of.
Right.
So my job is to try to anticipate what those questions will be.
Right.
Wi-Fi password, it's posted in your dressing room. It's right
Right.
there. Just scan the QR code. You know, all these things. You know, well, what if I want to order food? There's a phone number
Here's Uber Eats.
downstairs. Right, yeah. Or more importantly, make sure the guy downstairs knows that you've ordered so they
That is
know
true.
how to get you your food.
Right.
Yeah, because yeah. So it's all those things. Preventative problem solving is
But even,
one of my favorite phrases.
but like directors, how do they interact with you?
You know, every director is different. I've had some wonderful interactions with directors, and I've had some not so wonderful interactions with directors. A great example of that would be Take Me Out, which you referenced
Hmm.
earlier. We did that show last spring. It was fortunate enough to win the revival for best Tony for best revival. Take Me Out is notorious for the shower scenes
Oh
that
yeah.
take place. So for those of you who don't know, it takes place. It's the crux of the play is what if a star baseball player at the highlight of his career just announces that he's gay and comes out of the closet, and what the ramifications of that is with his teammates and with the sport of baseball, and really delves into what it is to interact with each other as men. And there are these shower scenes where it's full on nudity.
Yep.
And we had some famous names in this show. So there was this strong concern about pictures being
Hmm.
taken.
Oh yes.
So yeah, so there is this company called Yonder, and they make this pouch that locks magnetically. And the idea is that when the audience comes in, they have to lock up their phone in this Yonder pouch that they are not able to open without a key, which the front of house staff has. This was it was celebrated by Dave Chappelle in comedy shows. He was the one who sort
Hmm.
of introduced this, to the general public, and it's used a lot in the comedy circuit. So we did that
Hmm.
here, and this was something that the director was adamant about doing at the beginning, Then when he thought about it and he had this thought, oh my God, you've got all these people then in intermission, they want to unlock their phones and check their messages. You're like, intermission is going to be a half hour long. We can't do it. No, we can't do it. And then it was like, well, this was your idea. And we've already got this train moving. And let's try it first and see what the impact actually is before we say yay or nay. And thankfully for us, we were able to do it with little to no impact on the show itself.
I've experienced it, and I kind of think it's a necessary thing for that particular show. Anybody who's seen it, and I maybe because I saw it later, I kind of knew what to expect. You may probably had challenges in the beginning, like, what do you mean you're taking my phone from me?
Oh, absolutely.
It is one of those things. There's two parts. I think there's two parts to that one. One, you would give away a lot of the show if you had the phone. And then those images could get out and be used in other ways.
Absolutely.
I'm sure you considered all that.
Oh, absolutely. And that's the last thing that you want is an actor not being, fully in. Because if they're concerned about that before they step on stage, then how can they give the best performance possible?
Right. I mean, I think we had a whole conversation about this scene, but I think the reaction from the audience just verbally, because when the shower scene happened, a couple people in the back were like, oh my,
right, exactly.
There's enough going on to distract you in the audience.
Right.
You don't need that extra thing that would have been happening.
Absolutely.
Cool. So now you got a couple shows. You have one ending now. You have another one going in. So did your day start in the morning or?
Yeah. So they tell me my day is 10 to 6 Monday through Friday, but I'm generally, getting messages, 8 o'clock in the morning. We have staff. I have staff in as early as 7 a.m. Just making sure that all the building systems are functioning properly before people come in. Stage crew is here at 8 o'clock. They're working. We have rehearsal starting at 10 a.m. for one show. We have actors coming in at 12:30 for another show. Operating two venues, sometimes the calendars just don't line up the way you want them to, and we have shows going on at the same time.
Right.
So it's a lot. Thankfully for us, the theaters are within a block of each other.
Right.
So I get my steps in.
Right, and I can't imagine you not being at the show itself. You can't not stay
Absolutely.
away.
Right. Yeah. My office is inside the Broadway Theater, and it's a 7 o'clock show. At 6 o'clock, I'll grab my coat and my bag and I'll go down to the lobby and I'll hang out and wait for the audience to come in. Most of my career has been as a house manager. I normally have been that guy in the lobby dealing with everything. And, at the end of the day in my DNA, that's who I always will be.
Right.
So the idea of, it's hard to walk out when the audience is walking in.
Exactly.
I'm just not wired that way. So I'll stick around, and 7 o'clock curtains are a blessing for that. So I'm still home by 7:30.
No, I can definitely see, I try not to go to the events that I go to, or I try to pull back and, set up and it's like you said, it's not in your DNA. You were built for theater. The theater happens at 7 o'clock and goes to 11 or whatever. You really enjoy that. So say I'm, maybe a show's been on for a few weeks or months, you're like, oh, I've seen it. But you can't tell me when a show opens in the first couple of weeks, you're not there.
We're there.
What's going on.
Absolutely. And what's amazing is, the biological clock is a real thing. I know exactly how long 15 minutes is. Oh. From timing so many intermissions. And we'll be someplace where my wife and I agree to be on vacation. And I know when it's like the show's about to start. I just know. It's like, oh, well, we just thought it's like, oh, the show's about to start. Yeah.
And right. And you can also predict when something's not right. So looking back at your career, what do you wish you would have known then that you know now?
Oh my God. I think that's a whole other
Pick one.
or two. Well, yeah. Well, I think one of the big things for me, and I was actually discussing this with some undergraduate students the other day. I went back to my alma mater and participated in like a career networking event. Is someone really explaining to me what it's like to be an independent contractor, to be a gig worker,
Mm-hmm.
Nobody in my family had ever did this kind
Right.
of work. My father was a corrections officer. He worked in Rikers Island for 20 years. My mother, before she was a housewife, worked at a bank.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea was, and I was sent off to college to get an education so I can get a job, work there for 20, 30 years, get a pension and retire and make sure I
Right.
had health insurance. That was the goal. And the idea of working on a show and that show closing and then having to find work on another show, it was really hard to wrap my brain around that. And I
Sure.
think that's why I worked the career that I have working for these nonprofit institutional theaters,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to just bouncing around from show to show. I explained to somebody the other day, people don't really quite understand how Broadway works. And I always like to tell everybody, think of every Broadway show as a small business.
Mm.
Every Broadway show is a startup,
Interesting.
and it's a small business that's independent of everything else. People hear that there's a something called the Broadway League, so they think it's like a sports league, and everybody's working together and everybody's a partner. And no, they're not. Um, everyone has their own individual needs and interests. Now they're also aware that of the greater picture of the industry.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of the day, everyone's looking out for their own shows. And when
Gotcha.
the show closes, the show closes. And
Gotcha.
then on to the next project. And it's if you're not raised in that, if you're not aware of that, they don't teach you that. And you
Right.
learn that. And it's just a mental switch and how to manage your money when you're doing this kind of work.
Right.
Knowing what you don't know when the next job is going to be, you know.
No, I've seen actors, some very famous actors, they're always networking too,
Right.
You would think that they've got it down, but if I'm kind of behind the scenes, some of these award shows, and I've
Right.
watched in between, and you've probably seen the same thing. And I'm using actors as an
Yeah.
example. Same thing with tech people.
Right. Oh yeah.
But during those award shows, you watch these actors, they're going to different tables and talking to each other because you literally are trying to do your next project, or at
Yep.
least plant the seeds now, because you just
Yeah.
never know.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I have this I It's a magic formula. It's a magic elixir of hard work, talent, and luck. And when you get the right combination of those three, that kind of equates success.
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of talented people out there who don't find success because maybe they don't work hard or maybe they don't get lucky. Sometimes if you work hard, it creates a lucky opportunity, but then you don't have the talent to back it up, and you disappear quickly. Or you could work hard and work hard. So it's a magic combination of all three of those elements,
Right.
and when they mix together, that equates success.
Right. Well, you've been successful at this because like I said, I've known you for a while, and you've gone from place to place and always had a job, even during the pandemic. I know that was tough because
That was tough.
That was a tough one for all of us.
It really was. And I'll tell you, it's amazing how much of our self identity we wrap up in what we do.
Right.
And not having a theater to go to,
right.
It was tough. It
right.
really was. And I know I'm more than what I do for a living. I have a lot of other interests, but it doesn't mean that it's not easy when you don't have that. I said, I've been lucky. I've worked, in the theater industry, in the performing arts, my entire adult life.
Mm-hmm.
I have been fortunate enough not to have to take a job outside of this industry. And I consider that such a blessing. Like my office is a theater.
Right.
I've never worked corporate.
Right.
I don't know what it's like to go into an office building.
No,
Right. It's not me. I can't do it.
No, I've done it for a little bit. It's good to say I've done it. Somebody told me now that you're kind of unemployable now. So a situation like that. But I have to commend you too. I mean, I do know a lot of like lighting people and tech people. Once Broadway closed down, or theater and live performances and all that closed down, they were lost. And rather than finances take over, you got to survive. And Broadway was shut down for so long. I mean, what was it? Over a year.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I mean, you
Yeah.
can't,
It
if
was
you don't have savings or another spouse or somebody else who can help you kind of get through it. I know they left the business.
oh yeah.
They had no, they
Yeah.
moved out of New York, they moved somewhere else and just started a whole different thing. So I commend
Right.
you on being able to stick with
Thank
it.
you.
And you
Yeah.
knew it would come back eventually, but
Right.
you're
Yeah.
back.
It was hard. I'm very fortunate. Sometimes I look back and I say to my wife, I was like, I don't know how we did it. I don't know how we got through it, but we did.
You did.
And the other side of that, I remember when things just started shutting down, there was a young lady who worked for me, and it was one of her several part-time jobs,
Mm-hmm.
up to and including stage managing these off-Broadway shows. And I remember she came to me, she said, I just lost all four of my jobs in the past hour.
Wow.
And she was living paid, check to check, multiple jobs. By the end of the week, she had packed up and she had to move back home to her folks
Yeah.
because
Tough.
it just stopped. Yeah.
Tough. So, Jim,
Yes.
you have always, like you said, you started at the New Victory Theater. It was a
Right.
children's theater, and
Right.
you were responsible for really bringing a lot of young people up.
Yeah. Yeah. It
What?
was an amazing opportunity. We created a youth development program in within the theater where all of the ushers, all the front of house staff that we hired were consciously teenagers, ages 16 and older. And we did it without a plan. And as we kept on doing it, then we realized we had some, when we started the theater, we had some older, I use that term loosely, 20, 20, and 22-year-olds who had some experience ushering in other theaters. And there was this natural mentorship that happened between the older ushers and the younger ushers. Eventually, those older ushers moved on. The younger ushers became older ushers. We hired more 16-year-olds. And that mentorship happened as well. And we said, hey, wait a minute, there's something there. And we really looked at it with the help, the number of our colleagues, in the education department, and we created this structured program that we called the Youth Corps. And we would bring people in and they would work for 3 years with identifiable benchmarks after year one, year two, year three, that would give them the skills in order to either pursue a career in this industry or just life and professional skills that they can transfer on to do other things in life.
Oh, that's a good
Yeah.
point. So what advice, knowing that, what advice would you give somebody who wanted to get into theater?
It's a wonderful life with a lot of sacrifice. I had a boss who told me once that the theater is a demanding mistress. There are a lot of, social events, a lot of celebrations that I missed. I was working, nights and weekends for a long time, and you have to understand that. Yes, you work to find that balance in it, but I was there for the important stuff.
Right.
But there were a lot of other things that I missed.
Right.
A lot of camping trips that I never made it to. Right.
That's okay. I don't love camping. That's all right.
I've heard all the stories.
You've heard my stories about camping. Give me a nice
Right.
hotel.
Exactly. I need indoor plumbing as well.
Exactly.
But right. But it's really, it's knowing that. But it is a wonderful life. Working, especially here in the theater district, now that it's back to life, it's like being in college again. Because I'll walk out the theater and I'll go down the corner to get a bite to eat. And depending what time it is, I'll run into 4 or 5 different people that I know.
Oh, easy.
It's like walking.
Right.
Yeah, it's like walking through the campus group.
Right. Right. But
yeah.
let's assume somebody, so they've gotten past this idea that it's the mistress or it's a demanding thing. What skill would you think they would need to keep moving forward?
One is being able to think on your feet, because tasks can be taught. Common sense, being able to keep you cool under pressure, those are invaluable skills. It really is. And the one thing is to understand that this is an apprentice-based industry. No matter how smart you are, no matter what your schooling is, everyone's coming in on the ground floor. You're answering the phone, you're getting coffee, you're making photocopies. That's just where you start. And unlike other industries, the time it takes to progress through and up the ladder might be slower than others. I
Interesting.
remember 2 years out of college being at an alumni event and speaking with some guy who I casually knew I graduated with, who by all accounts was an idiot when we were in school and hadn't progressed that much. But he was working for some financial institution and he gave me his card and he was like a vice president.
Hmm.
And I'm sure at that point he was probably making double what I made.
Hmm.
And I remember being so upset with myself
Hmm.
because I'm like, this idiot is going to be buying a house in a couple of years, and I'm still living with my parents. Like, is that fair? And it's not an apples to apples comparison, and you
Right.
have to understand that.
That is
And
true.
eventually, your success will be measured by who you are, and not
Right.
what somebody else is and what somebody
Right.
else views you as.
No, it's interesting. I've said before on this podcast, I started in theater and kind of found my way around. Basically, what you're saying, you come to
Right.
terms with what it is, the sacrifices you make, or the money you may not make in the beginning. Um, but you got to take a serious look at it and say, all right, is this for
Right.
me? And if the love is there, you just kind of figure it out. You keep going. There
Right.
is a path, definitely. As long as
Absolutely.
it does take time,
Right.
and you are in the middle of it. So,
Yeah.
and you're a happier person. I think, you're definitely a happy person, or seem to be. You're
Right.
you're a happy person doing what you
Right.
love. And I think that at the
Yeah.
end of the day is valuable. I think too, the other thing people need to look at, and this is what I experience in theater and even in my current job, jobs like this, there's egos involved and challenging people
Yes. Yes.
that you have to navigate, which I think is a skill
100%.
that you got to navigate, really figure
Right.
out in order to be successful.
Right. No, absolutely. It's Bill Parcells, who used to be the coach of the New York Giants. My other hobby is football. I'm a passionate football fan. But Bill Parcells, I look at a lot for inspiration in terms of how to manage people. And one of the greatest things that he ever said was his job was to know what motivates his players. Some players needed a hug.
Mm-hmm.
Some players he needed to scream at. Some players he needed to leave alone.
Mm-hmm.
And his job was to find out what motivated each person,
Right.
and to get them. And that's how he got them to perform at their best.
Right.
So, and that's what I try to do well. I look at my team and I feel, okay, this person, I need to be on top of them.
Mm-hmm.
This person will not respond well if I'm
Mm-hmm.
on top of them. So I've got to lay off.
Right.
And that's how you get buy-in, and that's how you get a team to succeed. See, personally, I can't be micromanaged. And
No.
I had a boss who learned that, and he's been my reference for all my other jobs. And he'll tell my future potential employees that, like, Jim is best when he's left alone.
Well,
And you'll be fine. Right. So, yeah. But, as a manager of people, you need to know that.
right. And you're just not managing your team. You're managing up from a
Yes.
director level. Then you have tech
Exactly.
people, which tech people are a
Yep.
special breed.
Yep. Yeah. No, absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
there's black, white, and gray, and then there from them it's very black and white. I love tech
Right.
people, but there's a very black and white with them, and you got to understand that.
Absolutely.
There's no gray in the real hardcore tech people.
Right.
No,
Yeah.
I don't mean to pick on them, but I
No, yeah, absolutely right. There's no room for ambiguity. You can't assume, you can't infer. You've got to. This is what it is.
And I've learned a lot from tech people, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
So this has all been amazing. If somebody wanted to follow you, the work you're doing, what's happening at theater, how would they do that?
Okay, well, 2st.com is our website. You see all the shows that we're doing. I am probably the most searchable person in the world. You Google Jim Joseph and Broadway, and lots of cool things come up,
Cool.
up to and including my TEDx Broadway talk that I gave a couple of years ago about diversity on Broadway, which I'm very proud of. And lots of cool things, that you can find on the internet about me.
All right, we'll put it in the show notes. Thank you, Jim. This has been all amazing. We will continue chatting later. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Fun.
Thanks for listening to Creating the Perfect Experience. To get in touch and learn more, visit markstevenagency.com. If you enjoyed today's episode, let us know by leaving us a review or posting about us on social media. We love to see it. Until next time.